If you're just joining us, say hello. Feel free to type into the chat. All right, we'll get going in just another minute or two. If you're just joining us, tonight's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be having a conversation for the first half of the hour, and then we're going to be taking questions from the audience. So if you have questions during the discussion, be sure to make sure you type them in. There's no question that you can't ask here, and make sure you get those in, and we'll be looking at them to answer. And I think the first question is if you're joining, just let us know where you're coming in from. We're coming to you from New York City, as well as the West Coast. Where on the West Coast, Jacob?
I'm in San Diego right now. Sunny
San
Diego.
All right. Well, I feel like this is the right way to do this is the same way you do popcorn in the microwave, which is like when you hear the pop slow to a certain point, you go, okay, enough of the popcorn's ready. And I think that this NSHSS audience is popcorn ready. So without further ado, cool. And I already see questions coming in. All right. And I think tonight's going to be interactive with panel. As far as will there be scripting, that's not on the agenda, but there's lots of videos of our panelists, and they're the perfect people to be asking. They're the perfect people to be asking about scripting. Yeah, definitely perfect for the Q&A. All right, so I'm gonna switch back over here. So welcome everybody. My name's Jonathan Bobrow. I'm the CEO and founder of Move38. And tonight, I'm really excited to be doing this. This is kind of a treat for me. I'll give a little bit of background about Move38 and what blinks are, what the signage behind me is, and what these curious hexagons that were on camera moments ago. And then we've got two guests joining us tonight, both game designers, and more than just that. So we're going to get to hear a little bit more about their background. But tonight is all about the unexpected benefits of making games. And I felt like the best way to think about that and hear about that and learn about it is to have people who in their lives have had games play a role. And I'm actually excited to dig even deeper tonight because my frame of reference for our guests is only a piece of the puzzle. So before I get into our guests, let me just share a little bit about Move38. I founded the company just over 4 years ago. And we founded the company on the idea that we were going to make tools and toys for creativity. And we said the things you play with, they shape the way you think. And our flagship product, which launched at the end of 2019 and started shipping in 2020, is Blinks. It's the world's first smart tabletop game system. And it's an open source platform, meaning that anybody can see how they're made and make their own games for the game system. And this is something that we feel very passionately about, that that building a game system that is supported by a community is just something that kind of shares a general sense of learning and creativity that we want to see more of in the world. And I'm going to switch over to show what blinks are. So these are blinks, and blinks come like this in any game package. And inside of them, inside of the package, are these light up hexagons. And they have this trait where they respond to touch and they communicate with each other. And each one of these blinks is actually just like a Nintendo game cartridge. it knows a different game. I'm just going to bring this over. And so at this point, we've made more than 30 games, and here's about like 27 of them. And just as an example of what a game might look like, this is a game that I'd like to show real quickly. It's a game called Dark Ball, and it's kind of the Pong of blinks. And so the way you play it is in each side, there's a dark ball trapped. And when you press, the ball gets shot out. And the goal of this game is to hit the ball at just the right time. And if your timing's really good, the ball will shoot off really fast. And if your timing's really bad, it'll come off really slow. And if you miss, you take damage. And so you want to be the last player alive. But the neat thing about this game is that it's modular. So you can play with as many players as you'd like to play with. And the game scales to play in that way. And it can even be played as a game on its own. So if you want to play a game alone, you can play solo mode. Oh, I'm really bad at this. But there's so many ways that people are playing with games like this that we didn't even expect for them to play with it that way. And that's part of the fun. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for the evening. I'd like to welcome Dan King and Jacob Surovsky. Dan, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Dan. I'm the games lead at Move38. I guess I started with Move38 3 years ago actually as a summer intern. And I sort of stayed on and helped develop a lot of the games that are now on the platform. I think when I joined the company, there were like 3, and we had to get 12 done by the end of that summer. Yeah, my background before Move38, I was a physics major in college. I had a minor in architecture and in game design. And I worked as a writer. I did some physical fabrication stuff before this. I had a lot of weird jobs before I started at Move38. But yeah, I've always either been a game or at a stretch experienced designer throughout my whole career. And Move38 is just a really great place to combine a lot of different expertises that I've developed over the course of, I guess I've been out of college for like 10 years. So, a long time. And then considering I started as an intern, I then needed to hire some summer interns when I was, working full time at Move38. And one of those summer interns, spoilers, was Jacob. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Jacob. I interned with Move38 this past summer. I got to work on the Epic Adventure pack. I learned all about blinks from scratch. I got to do graphics for, there it is. Oh, I love the package so much. It's so good. I got to work on the graphics for Crownfall, and then I also developed the game Treasure Tumble, which was super fun. Previously to Blinks, I was a college student. I graduated with a degree in arts, technology, and business. So I'm always looking to be working in game design or themed experience design, toy design. What really drew me to Blinks was what John said earlier about the vision of creating these creative tools and toys that just create a whole new style of thinking through the way that they're played with. So yeah, really excited to get to talk about that tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jacob. I feel like you touched on a couple things that actually I want to start with is I'm curious. So one of the things that I think I get asked a lot, and a lot of people are curious about, is how I got into making games. And so I feel like, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what was the first game you made, and how did you get into that?
I mean, if I can go first,
Yeah.
I was an architecture major when I first entered college, and it didn't really work out. And I
What
I
about it
needed to
didn't work
fill
out,
some
Dan?
time. I wasn't good at it. Turns out I was not cut out for architecture. And so I needed to change majors. I ended up changing to physics, but due to some scheduling problems, I had like a year of time to fill. I had 2 semesters where I had to take a bunch of prerequisites for physics classes and quantum mechanics I hadn't taken. So I had all this extra time in my schedule, and I started taking digital art classes, and eventually sort of got this minor in game design. And during that time, my friends and I were getting really into board games. This was when like Catan was sort of getting very popular in America, and like all my friends were playing it. And both me and a friend, another friend, Alex, started using this website called the Game Crafter that will do single run board games. You can like get custom printed board games of your own design. And we both started making games on the Game Crafter. And it was just sort of like, they had contests. It was a really fun community to be part of. And we liked playing board games, and we thought making board games would be fun. And so I ended up spending a couple years, even during when I was working as a professional writer and game designer. And they're all above me. All these black boxes, these are all from the Game Crafter. These are like 10 or so games that I made during the couple of years between college and like the early 2010s. So yeah, I started making games, I don't know, sort of during a weird time in my life when I was changing majors and when board games were getting super popular. And it was a natural, even though I wasn't very good at architecture, I had learned a lot in architecture school about graphic design, about spatial design, about, in some ways, behavioral design. A lot of architecture, at least the way it's taught at Syracuse where I went, is about architecture is about guiding people through some sort of experience, about pointing their attention at things and making sure that they can get from place to place and making things clear. And so a lot of those concepts seemed really easy to apply to making games. And I guess when I grew up, like growing up as a kid, I always thought I was going to be an architect. And so I'd never considered that making games was a thing I could do, because since 3rd grade, I'm like, I'm going to be an architect. And suddenly faced with the reality of not being able to be an architect, I don't know, it became like, oh yeah, I guess I could I like games. Why couldn't I do this? Yeah, that's kind of a long story, but yeah, that's sort of how I got into making games.
Yeah, I also would love to talk about, and I mean, I think this is great for speaking to an audience, I think, who's primarily of high school scholars, talking about what might be next for you in your path of education. I, from the 3rd grade, wanted to be a theater artist, an actor, but wasn't really, that wasn't the path that I wanted to take in my higher education, just knowing that you didn't necessarily need a higher education to be an actor. So I wanted my my college education to be hopefully in the field of like theme park design. That's what being an Imagineer or a theme park designer. So in my freshman year of college, I was learning more and more about theme park design, and I had toured a theme park design studio where I saw them working in Unity. And so I was like, oh shoot, like if I just learn Unity, easier said than done, I'll be able to be a theme park designer. It'll be a great tool to learn. So my sophomore year, I enrolled in a introductory Unity course to just learn the basics. And that's where I think I made my first game, because I had to make it for the class. But what I really liked about it was I'm so fascinated. I'm not like a techie coder guy at heart, but I'm so fascinated by the amazing things that you can do with code when it's interactive and entertaining, and the storytelling that can be done with that. That's my theater background again, the storytelling perspective. So I kind of got into it very sideways, where it was like, I want to be a theater artist and then a theme park designer, and then realizing, well, I can't build theme parks on my own, but I can develop little games on my own, and I can make that happen on a smaller scale. So I've taken a couple of game design classes in college that I really enjoyed. That gave me the confidence to apply for something like the Blinks internship, which really gave me like the toolkit I needed to be like, okay, now I'm a published game designer. Treasure Tumble is my first kind of real game that's really out there. And now there it is. It makes me so happy to see it on a sticker. And then going forward from there, now I'm doing more and more game design in my career going forward. So yeah, I mean, that's how I got started and where I'm headed with game design, I guess.
I think this is really cool. So both you and Dan both had kind of adjacent to game design skill sets. So Dan from architecture and thinking about design for like architecture, actually, I feel like I like when I hear it broken down kind of academically, where it's about architecture isn't so much about the building, but it's about the relationship of space and people. And you know, games are arguably about the relationship of people and systems. And you know, and then similarly, Jacob, your background in theater and you know,
yeah.
What was the line?
I was going to say, well, if one is spaces and people, then theater is, if architecture is spaces and people, then theater is stories and people. And I think games are spaces, stories, and people all combined.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the neatest things is I feel like, you know, while sometimes I feel like it's like, oh, there's kind of a predisposition to a game designer must have this kind of background or this. But I think one of the neatest things about games is that whatever your background is, that there's room for you to bring that skill in and bring your applied knowledge into making your own games. It's it's a creative medium that really just allows for, and I would say benefits from a broad range of experience. Oh yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I don't know if this is jumping ahead, but you know, thinking about this idea of like benefits of making games. One thing that really helped me, and I think is a huge benefit to being part of the game design community, is game jams as a sort of cultural thing in game design. Similar thing in like software design hackathons, but game jams are a big deal in the game design world, and those are really incredible ways for you to bring a weird skill to a place and be able to use it over a weekend. Like make a, you know, game jam, if anyone doesn't know, is a limited time game making event. So it's usually a weekend, sometimes a little longer, and usually team up with strangers. You have a prompt and you make a game in a weekend. And the games are very small and they're very simple. But like I learned Unity entirely at game jams. I didn't know Unity when I moved to New York. And then I went to a game jam and they needed someone to do some extra Unity coding. And I'd done a little bit of C++ in college. And I was like, I guess I could try it. But I brought my architecture skills. You know, the first game I worked on, I made 3D models of the environment because that was something I could do. But one of the things, yeah, like if you are thinking about either going into game design or even just curious about it, there's really no reason not to participate in one game jam just to see what it's like. Even if you're like, oh, I don't have any of those skills. Okay, well, they still need a writer. They probably still need someone to just do some data entry depending on how the game is built. They probably need someone to find some art depending on how the game is built. Like anyone could be helpful at a game jam, and you're going to meet a bunch of really interesting people, and you're potentially going to learn a new thing or just learn something about yourself.
And I feel like, so you mentioned also like you came to the game jam with a bit of maybe a little bit of coding skills, and we'll talk some more about that. I'm curious, Jacob, did you have experience coding? You said you you know, you mentioned you're like, okay, if I could just learn Unity, that's the way in. But
Yeah. So in college studying, my major was arts, technology, and business. So I was exposed to a little bit of all three. I was introduced to front end and back end web development, which was very much not my cup of tea. I took the Unity course that taught me a little bit of how to script in Unity. Also, for anyone listening who's like, what's this Unity? Like, Unity is being together with people. It's not a program. There's a web development program, or not web development, sorry. There's just a video game design software called Unity. It's free. It's a really, I mean, it's fairly ubiquitous because it's free, and I wouldn't make the bold claim that it's
extraordinarily well supported.
Yeah, it's not
Like the
necessarily
documentation
easy to
for
use,
it and the
but
community is enormous.
yeah, there's I don't even want to, the number is huge of how many people use it and have tutorials on what to do in it. That anytime the great thing about Unity is like you learn 2% of how to use it, and then you go, I want to make an asteroid shooty game, and then you Google how to make gun in asteroid shooty game, and there's 15 tutorials on how to do just that. And you're like, great, I'm just gonna copy all that code,
Yeah.
paste it in there, I made my game. Like everyone's already done everything in Unity, so you can always find resources for how to do whatever you're thinking to do, and that's why it's really nice and people say to use it. Yeah, I did a bit of Unity, a bit of Arduino, and you get, when you've just done a little bit of a code here and there, like as long as you can, and this is just a coding thing in general, I think, like as long as you understand the underlying logic of how code works, you can pretty much figure out how to pull things off, even if it's really not elegant. Like Dan can attest to this, that I would figure out really convoluted ways to do things in code, because you can write really basic statements and just stack them on each other, and then you can get complicated things to happen. Or you can write really elegant things in code that get the same things to happen. So I was able to figure out how to get the results in code, even if they weren't elegantly written. And I think for most introductory stuff, that'll really suit you fine in game design.
Frankly, even for some intermediate stuff, that's probably fine too.
Yeah, like this code is not, dealing with personal information or money or high security things. So you don't need to be writing the most elegant, beautiful code in the universe.
Yeah.
All this just to say, like, don't feel intimidated or daunted by the idea of writing code for a game. The code is just a way to make the things happen that you want to have happen in your game.
I feel like that's a really, I think one of the things that, so I'm teaching a semester-long course at NYU this semester. And one of the things that I think stands out is typically when we're introduced to the idea of computer programming or coding, I think there's very strict ideas of like what that looks like or what it is. And I feel like, I'm curious to hear from your standpoint, but for me, games had such a clear, it was like, I have a clear outcome that's fun. I'm voluntarily doing this, and I need to accomplish this thing. And I need to, because I really want to have this experience. And so I end up learning a number of things along the way. Are there some examples of things that you're like, oh man, I can't believe I ended up learning about this, or in the process of making any of the games you've made?
I can speak to that. One comes to mind for me, just in regards to while I was interning at Blinks, and I mean, I see that there are questions about what it takes to program for Blinks. We can talk a little bit to that now and more to it later. But in my role as intern, I was to compartmentalize working on the game Crownfall that all the interns were working on as a team. My role was graphics. So as I was tasked with doing graphics, I learned how to do all of the code that manages how blinks display and how they light up. And that, as far as code goes, I don't think is that difficult to wrap your head around, or I didn't find it that challenging to figure out how to make blinks display in different ways. But then in working on Treasure Tumble, where I was making the entire game from scratch, the blinks communicate with each other, and the way that they communicate with each other is really, really cool, and also a little bit more computer science-y than how to make faces light up different colors. So I probably wouldn't have taken the time to sit down and learn how computer bytes work, how to encode and expand that information, which the blinks have to do to communicate with each other. Dan wrote some great tutorials on it, and there are lots of other amazing resources out there on how this works, but it wasn't in the requirement of things for me to know to develop the game on the team. So the only reason that I really dove into learning how it worked is because of the necessity of figuring it out to make Treasure Tumble function. I think, yeah, that's what we mean by that, John, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, it's a
computer
perfect
science
example. It's just a perfect example. And like, I feel like the game itself is doing things that have never been done on blinks before. And so, I mean, it's neat that, you know, you also brought a very specific skill set that you had outside of the game system, which was maybe actually you could take a moment to share a little bit about like what you had been working on outside of that space, because I think it's really neat that you were able to translate something you were working on outside.
Yeah, it's like the marble. Yeah. Yeah. So in addition to doing some game stuff, I tend to work more in physical spaces. I do a lot of 3D modeling and 3D printing for fun. And something that I love to 3D model and 3D print is marble tracks, marble machines, different mechanical marble contraptions. So when I started working on Treasure Tumble, it was kind of a fusion of two things. There had been this sort of idea floating around of creating a blinks game that could be stacked up vertically, because blinks are normally played on a tabletop, but they can be stacked on their edges upwards. So coming up with a game that could be played vertically, and then pairing that with my interest in gravity-driven marble contraptions. So yeah, there's the blinks up on an edge. And so that was like this fusion of an outside idea that had nothing to do with blinks or how blinks functionally work, and then some way to apply that to blinks and make a whole new game out of it. The other big thing that I feel like we should talk about in regards to blinks, and this also applies to coding and game design in general, is that blinks are entirely open source, something that John talked about. And a big part of my game, because it's being played vertically, it has gravity in the game. Everything in it needs to flow downwards. And so one of the other team members at Blinks had written a really great piece of code that made Blinks essentially like have gravity or have an internal sense of...
Well, yeah, what's funny is that he had written it before just as like a technical curiosity, and it wasn't that it was a gravity thing, is that he had just written a piece of code that made all blinks agree on a direction. They just chose a direction and pointed in it, and they all pointed together no matter how large the group was. Yeah. And Jacob and I were working on his game and struggling to figure out how to get the gravity to work.
We wrote a gravity, but it was in my special way of, like I said before, I don't know how to write elegant code, so I wrote really like convoluted code that made gravity work, but it had
it definitely worked.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you found this code that he already written. You're like, oh, we can just wholesale. And I think you must have taken 100 lines out of your program and put in Josh's 12, and you're like, and gravity.
And done.
Like, we're done.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that then led into the computer sciencey stuff that I've been reading about, because Blinks, the way that they communicate, they have a limited amount of information they can send. And my version of gravity had been taking up too many pieces of information to send. There wasn't enough information for the game to happen in the Blinks. So by finding that open sourced code that was just there to yoink out, I didn't have to figure out how to write it. I didn't have the brain waves to write that kind of code. I could just go, oh, great, that works for me, pop it in, and then build a game on top of it. So all code and how easy it can be, or how much it happens in a team environment is important.
How about you, Dan?
I'm trying to think of examples of stuff that I mean, I know it's happened, but I'm trying to think of something that I learned to use 3D printers at a game jam. I was at an analog game jam called Game Smash at a digital fabrication lab down on Christopher Street in Manhattan. I was on a team with some strangers, and there was a bunch of things we needed to do. We had one weekend to make this board game, and one of the things we wanted player figurines. And I was the only person who knew how to 3D model. This is from architecture, but nobody knew how to 3D print. But they were like, well, if you're going to make the models, you're going to also have to figure out. So I ended up being the person who went and spoke with the guys who brought the 3D printers and talked to them about tolerances and angles. And I showed them some models, and they gave me some pointers. And I ended up I didn't do any game design that weekend. I made some suggestions, but the rest of the time I spent modeling and 3D printing player figurines. I was functionally the artist of the team, even though I don't consider myself particularly artistic. But yeah, I mean, 3D printing is something I'd always wanted to know how to do, and I never had an excuse to learn. And suddenly I'm in a position where my team looks at me and is like, we need to 3D print these. Can you do it? It's like, guess I'll figure it out. Yeah, and we ended up winning that jam. That was a really exciting experience.
And I feel like I also want to tie in, because I think this has been a recurring theme, but Jacob, right before Dan, you gave that anecdote, like I think both of you are talking about these social settings and the community. And so before we take some questions from the audience, I guess also just, I'm curious to hear, so like we've talked a lot about the kind of like, I don't know, maybe more technical skills that you might have been gaining, whether it be learning how to 3D print, which is something you can apply all sorts of places, or being proficient in coding to the point where you can realize an idea, maybe not, work for NASA, or better yet, maybe if you're working for NASA, you're working in their prototyping lab rather than.
I do often, John's probably heard me, I do often say this whenever we're trying to make something and it's not super precise, and it's like, come on guys, we're not making spaceship parts. Like, it's not, the tolerances aren't that high. But yeah, I couldn't work for NASA.
That's not now that you've said that.
Yeah, I never could anyway.
Cat's out of the bag.
They're watching. They're like, his tolerances won't be space worthy.
No, I wouldn't fly in a ship I made.
But so you've gained these technical skills, and I think both, when we think about some of the things that are so difficult, so like, and actually I think this is really important. Like, I think that one of the areas that's so difficult for most people, especially in the US, is science, technology, engineering, math, and there's all this push for STEM and STEM related education. And so like games, I guess kind of exercise that part of the brain. But then you're also talking about community and game jams. And I feel like I just want to hear your thoughts on, like, has making games, how has it contributed to your social life? Like, yeah.
How has making games contributed to my social life?
Yeah.
I think, in school, in college, hands down, the nicest group of people, if you were to pick a major to hang out with on a day-to-day basis, you want to hang out with the games design people. They're all so nice and so creative, and everyone has such amazing ideas and styles, and like they're just the kindest, best, nicest people. So games design people, if you're going to a game jam or hanging out in a game design forum, which we should talk about that, and Blinks, you're just going to find really nice, welcoming, good people wherever you go. I think Blinks has really made that integral to their whole like core company culture, in that Move38 has both a forum and now it's not like an official Discord for Blinks where people are constantly discussing coding questions, brainstorming new ideas, documenting development of existing games, hacking Blinks and coming up with new ways to code for them. And all of this is both established and encouraged by all the folks in charge of Blinks, which I think is awesome. So I think there's a huge benefit to having community be integral to the design process, which is something that Blinks has done. But it doesn't just exist in Blinks, it can exist anywhere. And yeah, like when you get more ideas on the table, sharing and everything is open to be shared, that's how you can find more elegant code to execute the idea that you have, or get help when you run into a wall. Unity is the go-to game design software for so many people because it has that community that is supportive towards using Unity. So yeah, the examples continue, but I think that's it for me. I mean, I've made friends working on games. I've made friends in work environments where I've been a game designer, and it's just cool. It's fun to do. So.
I think that something that maybe, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of a broken record with this game jam thing, but I'm real. John knows that. I mean, I'm a real proponent. I'm sort of like a zealot for game jams, but something that I will say, I don't know that I learned it at, but certainly, especially when you're young, if you're working like entry level or something, you know, I came to New York and I was a junior instructional designer at an educational game company. And, you know, over the course of 4 years, I got sort of some sort of meaningless promotions. But something that I didn't get to do in my job at first was like lead. You know, you were pretty much, you were given tasks and you completed them with varying levels of independence. But, you know, I moved to New York in October of 2012, and in January of 2013, I was on a game jam team of 4 people, and I had to lead. Like, I mean, I wasn't in charge of the whole thing, but there were elements that I was in charge of, that people were coming to me with questions. I was the only person who could 3D model. So people were coming to me expecting me to be an expert or be the most knowledgeable person. So getting that opportunity to lead, to do time management and stuff like that in a way that you do eventually have to do at your professional job, but which you're given a little bit less power to do when you're young, you can do at a game jam. You can lead a team at a game jam if you have a strong enough personality. Like, you could wander in as a 19-year-old and be like, I'm in charge of this game. And if they take your word for it, guess what? You're in charge of that game. And I think there's a certain, that if you imagine that in your life you will find yourself in leadership positions, you know, good time to practice. Even if you're not, you know, even if you don't feel like you have all the technical skills to do a game jam, like I was saying before, you have some skill, and every skill is useful at a game jam. And leadership is one of them. I
think to piggyback on that, additionally, just for everyone listening, even if you're not like, okay, I don't want to be a game developer, but I'm just tuning into this talk because it seems interesting. What a game jam is to the games industry very likely exists for whatever it is that you are interested in. So even if a game jam itself doesn't excite you, that's totally fine. There is definitely something out there that will give you the same kind of community, you know, rapid output, experimental environment to just try stuff out with a team, with people. for, with a theater background, it's like fringe festivals or smaller theater festivals.
24-hour film festivals.
24-hour film, 24-hour film festivals if you're a filmmaker.
Hackathons. I personally have participated in 3 different architecture jams that are exactly like game jams, except you make a building. Not quite a building, obviously. You make like a little pavilion. So, Jacob's right. The sort of do it in a weekend exists in a lot of industries and has all the same benefits.
And I feel like a lot of these things took learned a lot of elements from the way games in general are structured. They, provide these comfort zones, these, areas where you're free to fail, right? You try to accomplish this thing that's time limited. There's something sort of a contest about it. I feel like now's a good time to take a look at some of the questions and also open it up for some more. And I'm just going to start with the very first one, which was, do you need advanced programming skills to create or tweak games for Blinks?
No, you don't. Specifically on Blinks, no. You need to understand, loosely, like Jacob was saying, the structure of code, the way that code in general works. No, and we had some games made at this last Global Game Jam 2020 that, or 2021. Oh, geez.
2021.
Yeah, that one. We had some games made that we gave awards to that were really impressive, that I opened the code and it was like 45 lines that they had copied and pasted from the tutorials, but they copied and pasted in their own order. And it was like, they made a great thing. So no, you don't need advanced knowledge at all. You like I said, you could copy and paste lines from the tutorials and make a unique game in a weekend. No trouble.
Yeah, and that's all on that forum that we were talking about, the Blinks forum. There's a bunch of resources. Dan wrote, I think all of or most of. Dan wrote most of the tutorials on there. That's what I started with when I was an intern. I didn't know how to code for Blinks before I started interning, and by the end of my time, I had made 2 games or 3 games. And yeah, it's not so tough to get started. But I do think what can be daunting about it is that all of the code, if you are not familiar with coding, is written in code. And so I really would recommend, if you're getting started, go through the tutorials, go through them in order, because they start from easiest concepts to more difficult concepts. They're broken down into chunks. My mistake would be looking at a tutorial being like, I got this, scrolling down to the bottom and reading all of the code that was written for that tutorial. I'm getting very intimidated because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many lines of code here and they're doing so many things. And I'd scroll back up and just read how Dan had broken it down. I'd go, oh, okay, I can follow along now. But I think learning coding is just all about familiarity. So the more time you can spend going over the concepts over and over, the more comfortable you'll feel with it, and then the more of a knack for it you'll get over time.
This is also kind of related to that. Our next question is about scripting for computer games. It sounds like this participant has learned about scripting specifically and kind of tested scripting in Roblox Studio. And it looks like kind of adjusting some of the parameters, making parts. Let's see. So as far as the question on that, what about scripting for computer games? Maybe that's a question a little bit more about how it's related, how programming for Blinks is related to scripting for computer games.
I haven't read the question.
Oh, maybe we can start answering it, and if we're not quite hitting it in the direction that the questioner intended, they could put a follow-up in the chat. But I think if you're interested in scripting for computer games or making games that can be played on a computer, there's a lot of ways to get into doing that. I don't want to be overwhelming and list off a bunch of places that computer games can be made, but computer games can be made in anything. I mean, even just working in Roblox and tweaking parameters and building things in there, you can be building a game in Roblox. That's totally a game that you're a game designer. You make games in Roblox and that's your platform. There's really great introductory coding platforms like Scratch. I'm a big fan of Scratch. That's a coding program where you don't write any code. All of the code is done with drag and drop block modules that you connect together. And you can only connect them in ways that make sense. It will let you know if you're writing something that's impossible. And what's great about that software too is that it's also entirely open source. So you can look at other people's projects and say, hey, this space shooter game, this Pac-Man game, whatever it is really great. I want to do it, but make it a little different. You can just copy all of their code and tweak it however you want and make your own game out of that. That's also a game that's played on a computer. I've done that for escape room projects and other, like as an intern, it was my job to make games in Scratch for a bit at another company. So Scratch is great. And then you can move into things like Unity. That's a program where you can make games that you can export to be on a computer, on a video game
Unreal is
console.
free now.
Unreal Engine is like a sort of a parallel contender to Unity. Some of these programs are now also adding ways to code that are not typing, but rather just dragging and dropping blocks. Like
Unity has some so technically they have state machines, which is the name of this kind of drag and drop connecting pipes together and saying this function connects to this function, connects to this function. So Unity and Unreal both have visual editors as well as code editors. In that sense. And
then just coding for the same code logic that you use to write for Blinks is the exact same code logic that you would use to write for video games. It might not be the same language all the time. There's different coding languages, which is such a ridiculous sentence to say. If you like, before I knew how code worked, I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. What do you mean by that? But like, just to say, the ways that you ask the computer to do things in code can be different depending on what code you're typing in. But knowing how if and then logic works, how to call different things and make them run, once you know one, it's a lot easier to pick up another.
Yeah, and a lot of them have a lot of overlap. So for instance, I learned, and actually just wanted to say to the person who first scripted something in Roblox, the first script I ever wrote was an export script for Illustrator. Like that was the first time I ever put pencil to paper in the sense of writing code. And it wasn't for a game. It was because I was trying to export every layer of a Illustrator document for an architecture project. And that was the first time I had to write code. Yeah, I mean, I took C++ in college for 1 semester. So like the begin, I mean, I basically just got to like just the dimmest little part of C++. I mean, you can spend a lifetime learning C++, and I spent 3 months. I took that, and then I took a class in ActionScript, which is a dead language used in Flash, that program that you're not allowed to use on the internet anymore. And then I learned Unity at Game Jam. So, and then I went and worked in Arduino at Move38. And the thing is that all those languages were different, but there was tons of commonalities. There were some unique things in each of them, but it's like if you learned Italian, no, you don't speak Spanish, but suddenly you start paging through the dictionary and you go, oh, that's very similar to the thing I know in Italian. And oh, this German word is very similar, and this French word is very similar. Like once you start to learn it, you start finding essentially cognates in all the other languages, and everything becomes easier and easier and easier to learn.
Out of curiosity, I'm going to ask a question before we're going to be wrapping in a little bit, but so get in your last questions if you want a question answered. What advice would you have for somebody who's interested in making their own game for Blinks? Yeah, what would you tell them?
That's a great question. Don't. The thing I always say to people who are starting out, people at game jams, is like, just assume that the Blinks can do it. Like, tell me, like, describe what you want it to happen, what you want to happen. Go on the forum, talk to somebody, and be like, I want this to happen, and the likelihood is that Blinks can do it. And read through the tutorials and figure out which parts you know how to do, and figure out which parts you don't know how to do. But and this is probably advice really for really any technical project, is like, just assume you can do it and then solve from there. Like, don't think to yourself like, oh, I don't think you can make a game that does this. Like, yes, you can. Somebody can. Whether or not you can do it today, sure, maybe you can't do it this afternoon, but it's definitely possible. So I think, especially for designing games with Blinks, like, you should just use your imagination, just imagine the game happening, and then the technical problems can be solved. The community will help you solve them. I've seen tons of people post an idea on the forum and then have someone else go like, oh yeah, I know how to do that here. And like, here's a little bit of code, and then go do it,
I love that answer. That's yeah. I think that's true for a lot of things. Just like, not, if you're like, oh, I can never do that, then you won't do it, and that's really sad. That's a huge loss, because the idea you had is probably really, really good, and it should happen. I'd say save often. Make sure to save.
Yeah.
And like, don't be afraid. Like, test. What I would do, because I didn't ever know what I was doing when I'm writing code, is I would write a thing, get it to work, and then save it, and then change one thing, and then test it. You can constantly be testing, making sure that you're still getting the results that you want. There's nothing worse than going through code and being like, there's a bug in here somewhere and I don't know where I put it, because that's kind of a nightmare.
Because I've done so many things since. Yeah,
like, you don't want to have to dig through all of your code and be like, oh, where did I misplace one comma? So don't be afraid to take your time and be methodical and test and really build step by step. Maybe this isn't a great advice to share, but something that is coming to mind that I think is a good lesson as well is like, there can be a sunk cost fallacy when you're working on any project. So never disregard the time that you've taken to learn something as like wasted time. Like, for example, on Treasure Tumble, I had spent weeks tinkering with this gravity system and writing it from scratch and really just trying to get it to work. But every time I added something else, a bunch more bugs popped up, and it was really frustrating. And then Dan gave me this great advice. He was like, you kind of just need to start over. And I was like, that's horrible advice. That's the worst thing someone could tell me. I didn't want to hear that. I wanted Dan to say, it's actually perfect, and we're going to do it right now. But that, of course, wasn't the case. But then being told, okay, you need to start over, it wasn't, and you've wasted weeks working on the game. It was, and you've learned a bajillion things, big and small so far, about how to make this game. And now you're going to be able to write version 2 in like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because Blink's games are very small in the amount
Jacob,
of code.
I don't know if you know this, but I rewrote Crownfall. So
right.
like that happens. Sometimes, the interns were working over the summer, and then their school years all started, and it ended. And they had made this amazing game, but it was a little too large. There were some bugs. And I was like, I can't really get their time right now because they're all in school again, and or they're busy, or they have other jobs. And I was like, they made this amazing prototype, and I can boot it up on Blinks and get exactly the behavior they want. But I know how to make this smaller because I've been working on Blinks for a little longer. And so I recoded Crownfall over the course of 2 days. But it's important that, like, in no way do I consider
sat down without us and been like, without Crownfall ever having been made, and been like, in 2 days I'm going to make a new game and it'll be called Crownfall. Yeah.
No, and I don't consider myself as having made Crownfall. You guys made Crownfall, and then I looked at your functional prototype and went, okay, I know which function they should have used but didn't, and then I wrote code for 2 days, but my name's not on Crownfall because functionally I didn't do anything. Like I was just given a perfectly acceptable game that was a little bit too big, and I made it smaller. And the fastest way for me to make it smaller was to start over.
That's a
But
huge
yeah,
lesson.
that time wasn't wasted. Their coding was not like what they did was make an amazing thing, and all I did was swoop in right at the last minute and just kind of like do a little typing, and it was over.
That's, I mean,
We've been talking about
we've been talking about game design tonight, and immediately that conversation turned into talking about code, because that's, I think, the thing that everyone thinks about when they think about game design. But we've touched on art and player mechanics and storytelling and all these other amazing facets of game design. For anyone out there listening who wants to be a game designer, the game is not the code.
No.
Code is part of the game. But when you're a game designer, you're coming up with, how do I make players do these things to have fun, to feel afraid, to feel smart, whatever your goals are. And you write code to accomplish those goals. So,
and often in a professional circumstance, you don't end up writing the code anyway.
I was just going to say, I'm currently working as a puzzle designer for a video game. I have the dream game design job. I'm not allowed to touch the code.
Yeah.
There are engineers whose job it is to touch the code because they're very good at writing code, and I am forbidden to even look at it. They're not forbidden, but like they don't want me looking at the code. They want me to be designing puzzles, and so my days are spent in Google Docs and PowerPoint, and occasionally I sketch a drawing on a napkin to give to the art team. Like, I didn't wind up needing to be good at writing code or drawing pictures or doing any of the things that I admire greatly but find very difficult. And yet I'm still a game designer. So yeah.
And Jacob, would you say that, but your experience and your exposure to learning how to code and having been on that, would you say that informs the way you work with people who do have to write code or in the process?
It definitely, oh yeah. I mean, it's great to be able to sit down and have a conversation with the engineering team or with the art team and not be making requests that they're like, this is super unreasonable. He clearly knows nothing about code. But at the same time, like it's one, we're talking about different levels of difficulty. So making a game that's 120 lines of code on Blinks is a great way to get started as a game developer. And for me, I was like, this is the perfect dose of coding as a game developer. And then going to something like Unity, where you can have hundreds of files of code all communicating with each other, and if anything breaks, the whole game is ruined. Like, that's a little bit higher pressure, so I can understand why they're not like, yeah, just hop in there and tinker around a little bit. It's a little more.
I got in trouble once at my first job because I did know some Unity, and I wanted to make a change in one of the games, and I just did it. Like I knew enough to make the change, and somebody was like, "Hey, the writer just pushed code," and I was like, "I just knew I just changed that," and I got in trouble because I was like, "You're not supposed to. It's not your place."
Oh no. Yeah, I was the other day. I was really confident in Unity at work, and I was like, I'm gonna try to write this standalone script just for a little binary calculator thing for fun, like an Easter egg in the game, nothing integral. And I sat down in front of a tutorial, and I was like, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll leave it to the team that writes the code. Like, this time around, they can have it. But,
I'm gonna answer one more of the questions that came in, and I did type an answer in response there. But one of the questions that came in was they're curious to know if Blinks were if there were new Blinks in the works, or if it was safe to invest in Blinks and get them now. And so I just wanted to share this because I think, so one of the things that, of course we mentioned that they're open source and anybody can make their own games, but because they're completely modular, as we continue to release new games and new Blinks and new capabilities, all of the existing Blinks that you have, they all just make the Blinks that you already own that much better. And so, yeah, very safe, and we plan to support that for a long time forward. So I wanted to, yeah.
And there are developer kits. Tell them about it, John.
Really nice new developer kits that I got to pack my first one of the new developer kits today, actually, and I was very happy with the nice new boxes we got.
Nice. And that, yeah. Oh,
So I'll share just a little bit about that right now. If you're interested in developing for Blinks or tinkering around, a lot of people even pick up developer kits just to see what other people are making in the forum. It's kind of like buying access to, you know, all of the things happening in the Apple developer preview or the developer kits, they're available on our website. Developer kits are available, and the best way to get them is in a bundle. So if you get the Game Maker set or get them game system and the bare bones developer kit, you can start to play games right out of the box, but then also plug in to any computer, Mac, PC, or Linux, and load games quite simply. It takes just a few minutes to get set up, and you can be loading games straight from the forum to try them out. Additionally, I should note that Move38 is publishing games from the community. And so last year, we decided very early on that we wanted the game community to be a self-supporting ecosystem. And so if you're interested in publishing games or having your own game out there, making a game for Blinks, you can submit it. And there's going to be lots of opportunities to get your own games out there. All of that's available at move38.com. And the most important thing that you should know is because Move38 and NSHSS are partners, there's always discounts available through NSHSS. So you can visit their website as well, or use your NSHSS discount code on our website. So be sure to check out the developer kits, the brand new Blinks game system. I'll hold up a couple of the latest. So these are the new Blinks game packs. And Jacob, of course, featured in our Blinks Epic Adventure expansion set. And yeah, I think that's probably a really great way to wrap for the evening. Jacob, thank you so much for all of your time. And Dan, thank you so much for all of your time. It's been really cool hearing your journeys, and I hope that everybody who joined us got to feel like we pulled back the curtain a bit, and I hope you joined us on the journey of making games as well.